This video is about Germany's unforgettable military strategies in history. Subscribe for more. In the heart of Berlin during the early 1930s, an underground room served as a meeting point for the elite of the German military, a group known for their relentless pursuit of tactical perfection. The air was thick with tension as the shadows flickered from the dim light of oil lamps, illuminating maps strewn across a large wooden table. General Erich von Manstein, a strategist revered for his unorthodox methods, stood at the forefront, his piercing blue eyes scanning the layout of Europe. The scars of World War I still lingered in the collective memory of the nation, and many believed that Germany's defeat had been a consequence of insufficient strategy rather than a lack of strength. Fueled by the desire to reclaim lost glory, the generals were convinced that a new approach was needed, one rooted in blitzkrieg, or lighting war, an innovative concept that promised to redefine the rules of engagement. The gentleman, von Manstein began, his voice steady yet commanding. "We stand at a precipice. Our enemies underestimate us. They believe our time has passed, but with the right strategies, we will strike swiftly and decisively." Among the attendees was a younger officer, Lieutenant Hermann Müller, a keen observer of the unfolding political landscape. His heart raced, not only from the excitement of the assembly but from the weight of what was being consumed. He had seen firsthand the power struggles within the Rhine and heard whispers of alliances forming across Europe. As the meeting progressed, the tension gave way to a fervent discussion on tactics that would soon send ripples across the battlefield. The generals debated the deployment of armored divisions, the coordination of air assaults, and the importance of speed over sheer numbers. Each strategy unveiled was more audacious than the last, drawing on the lessons learned from their predecessors, but now with a fresh, aggressive mindset. "Imagine, if you will," von Manstein continued, motioning dramatically towards the maps, "a rapid advance into Poland, catching our adversaries off guard. We will encircle their forces and cut them off from reinforcements. This is not merely a war of attrition, this is war as an art form." The room erupted with approval, the air electrified with ambition. But Müller remained cautious, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. He recalled the tales his grandfather told of the Great War, of how men charged bravely into the fray, only to be met by the relentless machinery of modern warfare. He glanced around the room, witnessing the conviction in the eyes of his fellow officers, but deep within him lingered a question: what would be the cost of this new strategy? As the meeting concluded, Müller lingered behind, lost in thought. The echoes of the past mingled with a foreboding sense of destiny. The strategies being formed would not only alter the course of Germany, but would also set the stage for confrontation with the United States, a nation built on the ideals of freedom and democracy yet prepared for war should the need arise. Across the Atlantic, in Washington, D.C., President Franklin D. Roosevelt was grappling with the rising threat in Europe. The United States had entered a period of isolation, weary from the scars of its own conflicts. However, intelligence reports began to trickle in, hinting at Germany's rearmament and the militaristic fervor sweeping across the continent. Roosevelt gathered his closest advisors, each of them aware that inaction could lead to dire consequences. The specter of another world war loomed, and the president's heart burned with the desire to protect not only the American homeland but the ideals it stood for. Among his advisors was General George C. Marshall, who had dedicated his career to understanding the military tactics of global powers. He believed that knowledge was key to preempting disaster. President Marshall stated, pointing to a map of Europe, "Germany's new strategies are not merely theoretical. They are practiced, and if we do not prepare for the consequences, we may find ourselves in a precarious situation." Roosevelt nodded, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. "We need to support our allies. Britain stands as a bulwark against tyranny. If we do not act, we risk not only Europe but potentially our own shores." And meanwhile, as the echoes of these strategic discussions unfolded across the Atlantic, a different story was brewing in the Middle East. In Palestine, Jewish settlers were organizing, facing the dual threat of rising tensions with Arab locals and the ominous shadow cast by the Nazi regime's anti-Semitic policies. Among them was a young leader named David Ben-Gurion, passionate and visionary. He believed in the necessity of a Jewish homeland, a place where his people could thrive free from persecution. As whispers of war reached their shores, he understood that the struggle for survival was not only political, but also one of military strength. "War is coming," Ben-Gurion declared at a gathering in Tel Aviv. "We must prepare ourselves, for only through strength can we secure our future. We will need to forge alliances, gather arms, and ensure that the world knows we will not be silenced." The crowd responded with fervor, but Ben-Gurion was acutely aware of the challenges ahead. The Jewish community had limited resources, and the world seemed preoccupied with its own turmoil. Allies were scarce, yet he could feel the pulse of history urging them to stand firm. Back in Europe, the stage was set for conflict. The Blitzkrieg strategies were taking shape, and the clock was ticking towards an inevitable clash. Germany's military machine was being primed, while the United States and its allies pondered their next move. The air crackled with anticipation and uncertainty, and the tides of history were beginning to shift. Himmler, witnessing the mobilization of Germany, could not shake the feeling that a storm was approaching, one that would engulf the very foundations of nations. As he walked away from the clandestine meeting, a sense of dread crept over him. He wondered if the strategies being devised would lead to victory or disaster. In Washington, Roosevelt prepared his country for battle, while in the Middle East, Ben-Gurion rallied his people, knowing that the fight for survival was only just beginning. And so, as the drums of war began to sound across continents, each character stood at crossroads, unaware that their choices would resonate through history. The question loomed large: would Germany's unforgettable military strategies lead to glory or chaos? With the world stage set for an unprecedented conflict, the winds of war began to howl, leaving only one question unanswered: what would become of those who dared to challenge fate? The next chapter awaited, and with it, the secrets of strategy and survival that would shape the very essence of war. The tension in Berlin escalated as the weeks turned into months. Germany's military strategists honed their tactics, and the atmosphere was electric with a sense of urgency. General Erich von Manstein convened a follow-up meeting with his most trusted officers, including Lieutenant Hermann Himmler, who had been grappling with the implications of their strategies. The walls of the underground room echoed with the anticipation of war, a war that Himmler feared would reshape the world. "Gentlemen," von Manstein began, his voice steady as he addressed the gathered officers. "They are tied to outdated doctrines, slow to adapt. We will exploit their weaknesses. Blitzkrieg is not merely a tactic, it is a philosophy." He placed a map of Poland on the table, the borders marked with bright red lines indicating the planned invasion routes. "Our first target will be Poland. We will strike with such ferocity that they will be incapable of mounting a coherent defense." Himmler felt a mix of dread and excitement. He could envision the armored divisions thundering across the plains, the skies darkened by the swarm of Stukas diving towards enemy positions. Yet, a flicker of doubt nagged at him. "What if our speed is met with equal resilience?" he asked, his voice rising above the murmurs. Von Manstein smiled, recognizing the fire in Himmler's spirit. "Ah, but that is where our planning becomes paramount. We will use deception. We will create the appearance of a full frontal assault while flanking their defenses, rendering their static positions moot. The enemy will not know what hit them." As the officers engaged in a heated discussion, Himmler remained focused on the consequences that lay ahead. He could picture the Polish soldiers, men with families and dreams, thrown into chaos. The realization that war was not merely a game of strategy but a catastrophic reality weighed heavily on him. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., President Roosevelt pushed his advisors for a more direct role in the European conflict. Reports of Germany's militarization flooded in, and the sense of urgency gripped the nation. The echoes of past conflicts reverberated through the hearts of the American people, and the memories of World War I haunted the corridors of power. "General Marshall, we cannot remain idle," Roosevelt exclaimed during a cabinet meeting. "The world is on fire, and we must prepare to douse the flames. If we allow tyranny to spread unchecked, it could engulf us all." Marshall nodded, studying the map of Europe. "Our alliances must be strengthened. Mr. President, Britain stands as our most important ally, but we must also engage with France. The time for isolation has passed. We need to ensure that our support is tangible." The President's eyes narrowed with resolve. "Then let us mobilize aid. We will supply arms, and we will train troops if necessary. We cannot afford to be a passive witness to history." Across the ocean in Palestine, David Ben-Gurion's determination grew. His vision for a Jewish homeland was being overshadowed by the looming threat of war. He called for a clandestine meeting with fellow leaders, hoping to galvanize the fragmented Jewish community. "We stand on the brink of a new world order," Ben-Gurion proclaimed, his voice rising above the murmurs of concern. "The danger from Europe is not just distant, it is encroaching upon us. We must establish our own defenses, create our own military, and take our fate into our own hands." The room buzzed with fervor. Young men and women, inspired by Ben-Gurion's words, began discussing the need for training camps and arms procurement. They understood that their survival was intertwined with the fate of Europe and that they must be ready to fight for their homeland. As preparations unfolded on both sides of the Atlantic, the the world stood poised for chaos. In Berlin, Himmler's doubts grew stronger with each passing day. He sensed a disconnect between strategy and morality, yet he felt the powerful tide of history pushing him forward. The Blitzkrieg strategy was not just about movement, it was a doctrine that sought to reassert German dominance at an unfathomable cost. The day of reckoning arrived with the dawn of September 1, 1939. Germany launched its invasion of Poland, the first test of von Manstein's audacious plans. The thunder of tanks rolled across the border, and the air was filled with the roar of aircraft. Himmler stood at the front lines, a mixed expression of pride and trepidation. He had trained for this moment, yet the reality of war was far harsher than he could ever have imagined. Within hours, the Polish defenses crumbled. The speed of the German advance was breathtaking, encircling cities and cutting communication lines. Himmler observed as his comrades carried out orders that had been meticulously planned. Yet, as he witnessed the destruction unfold, he could not shake the faces of those who suffered. The chaos of war, once a distant concept, became starkly real. Back in Washington, as news of the invasion reached Roosevelt, the gravity of the moment settled heavily in the Oval Office. "This is the moment we feared," he said grimly. "We must act. We cannot let tyranny flourish without consequence." With a heavy heart, Roosevelt prepared to address the nation, a call to arms that would resonate profoundly. At the same time, he recognized the importance of rallying not just military support, but also public sentiment. The ideals of freedom and democracy that America espoused would be tested in ways they had never anticipated. In Palestine, the news of Poland's invasion reached Ben-Gurion as well. He gathered his fellow leaders with renewed urgency. "The world is shifting, and we cannot afford to stand idle. We must create an organized resistance, not just for our survival, but for the future of our people." As the days turned into weeks, the echoes of war reverberated across continents. Each character faced their own crossroads, Himmler grappling with the morality of warfare, Roosevelt orchestrating America's response, and Ben-Gurion igniting the flame of resistance among his people. In Berlin, as Himmler stared into the chaos, he felt the weight of destiny pressing down upon him. War had unleashed its fury, and the question remained, what price would the world pay for these unforgettable military strategies? The answers were shrouded in the fog of conflict, but the next chapter of history was already being written in blood and valor, a testament to those who dared to challenge fate. As the storm of war raged, each decision brought them closer to a confrontation that would change the very fabric of nations. Would Himmler's resolve hold against the tide of destruction? Would Roosevelt's determination galvanize a nation's spirit? And could Ben-Gurion rally his people amid the chaos of history? The answers lay ahead as a relentless march of war continued to carve its path through the heart of Europe and beyond. The grinding gears of war continued to churn, each turn marked by the despair and destruction of countless lives. In Berlin, Lieutenant Hermann Himmler found himself at the epicenter of a brutal conflict that had become all too real. The roar of tanks and the cries of soldiers echoed in his ears as he moved through the chaos that unfolded around him. The Blitzkrieg tactics that had promised swift victory now unleashed a torrent of violence that left him breathless. As he took his position in the command post, the maps that had once been mere ink on paper transformed into battlegrounds of human suffering. Himmler found himself staring at the lines that represented Poland's borders, now smeared with blood and strewn with remnants of a shattered nation. The control room buzzed with frantic energy, officers barking orders and relaying reports of enemy movements. The stunning efficiency of the German machine was a marvel to behold, yet it left in its wake a haunting emptiness that gnawed at his conscience. "Lieutenant Himmler," a voice pierced through the din. It was Captain Weiss, his commanding officer, roused by adrenaline. "We need to secure the eastern flank. Get your men ready." Himmler swallowed hard, nodding as he mobilized his troops. The anticipation of battle fired up the men around him, but within his heart the heavy weight of doubt lingered. He witnessed soldiers charging into battle, driven by the excitement of glory, unaware that they were bearing the brunt of a strategy that treated human lives as mere pawns on a chessboard. In the distance, the sound of gunfire reverberated, and the skies darkened with the smoke of war. Himmler pushed forward, leading his men, but each step felt like wading deeper into the abyss. The clash of steel and thunder of artillery was overwhelming, yet he found their faces etched in his memory, the young men who had trusted in their leaders, who believed they were fighting for a cause greater than themselves. Meanwhile, across the ocean, President Franklin D. Roosevelt faced an uphill battle. As he paced the Oval Office, the weight of the world pressed heavily upon him. The news of Poland, its rapid fall had sent shockwaves through America. Roosevelt knew that to stand idly by would mean allowing tyranny to take root in Europe, but the American people were weary. The scars of the Great War had yet to heal, and the specter of another conflict loomed large. President General Marshall interjected, breaking through Roosevelt's contemplative silence. We need to act decisively. The American public must understand that this is not just a European affair, it is a threat to our own freedom. Roosevelt nodded, recognizing the urgency. Then let us prepare a message to the nation, a call to arms, not just for military engagement, but for a moral awakening. We need to convey the gravity of this situation. If we let fear dictate our actions, we may find ourselves fighting our own battles at home. But as the president worked to formulate his address, the sound of the radio crackled to life. The world listened intently as Roosevelt spoke of the need for unity and resilience. We must stand against oppression, he declared, his voice resolute. We will not allow the ideals of democracy to be silenced by the forces of tyranny. We will support our allies, and we will prepare for what lies ahead. Back in Palestine, David Ben-Gurion faced his own set of challenges. The news of the war reached the Jewish community, igniting a flame of urgency among its leaders. Ben-Gurion summoned a gathering in Tel Aviv, his heart racing with determination. The air was thick with tension as he stood before his people, all of them aware that the specter of war had come knocking at their door. Brothers and sisters, he began, his voice carrying the weight of history. The world is undergoing a transformation, and we cannot afford to be passive observers. The rise of tyranny in Europe threatens all of us. We must unite, organize, and prepare to defend our aspirations for a Jewish homeland. His words resonated deeply, igniting a fervor among the crowd. Young men volunteered to train for military roles, while others began strategizing ways to acquire arms. The realization dawned upon them all that survival depended not only on the outcome of conflicts far away, but on their own readiness to confront any future threat. As the war raged on, the blitzkrieg tactics unleashed upon Poland proved devastatingly effective. Within days, the German army carved through the heart of Polish resistance, capturing key cities and cutting off retreat routes. Emil found himself overwhelmed by the sheer speed and ferocity of the advance. The once familiar landscape transformed into a tableau of war. The screams of the wounded echoed through the air, and the streets once filled with life now lay in ruin. Yet amid the chaos, Emil began to see glimmers of humanity. A Polish soldier, cornered and desperate, surrendered in front of him. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. The tragedy of war did not discriminate. Emil's heart raced as he considered his next move. His instinct urged him to pull the man from the brink of despair, yet the weight of orders from above pressed heavily upon him. Taken away. Why spark from across the battlefield, oblivious to the bond that had just formed? Emil hesitated, but the order left no room for doubt. Yes, sir, he replied, feeling the anguish of his own conscience. The Polish soldier was dragged away, a life extinguished in the name of strategy. As the days turned into weeks, the narrative of the war began to shift. The German advances in Poland were met with growing resistance. In the heart of Europe, fears of a wider conflict grew. The Allies, witnessing the ferocity with which Germany waged war, began to strengthen their own military efforts. Roosevelt's call to action resonated beyond American shores, urging nations to prepare for the looming storm. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Winston Churchill rallied his own people. We will fight them on the beaches, we will fight them in the fields, we will never surrender. His words inspired a nation on the brink, galvanizing Britain's resolve to stand firm against authoritarianism. As news of Allied preparations spread, Emil received orders to secure a strategic position near the city of Warsaw. He felt the drumbeat of conflict reverberate through his being, yet his thoughts were filled with uncertainty. Each victory felt more hollow, the cost overshadowing any sense of triumph. The lives lost weighed heavily on his soul, and he began to question the righteousness of their cause. Meanwhile, the situation in Palestine grew more volatile as the conflict in Europe intensified. Ben-Gurion recognized that the Jewish people must not only prepare for the outcomes of global war, but also fortify their own aspirations for independence. He called for a conference, inviting leaders from Jewish communities across the region to strategize the future. We face not only the threat of oppression abroad, but also the peril of our own existence here, he urged. We must create a stronghold for our people, for if Europe falls, we cannot afford to be defenseless. As the plans took shape, the fervent desire for a homeland solidified among the Jewish community, igniting a resolve that would later be pivotal in their quest for statehood. The world was spiraling into chaos, and the intertwining fates of Emil, Roosevelt, and Ben-Gurion painted a vivid tapestry of struggle, hope, and the pursuit of survival amid the relentless tide of warfare. Each decision was a step towards an uncertain future, a future that promised to redefine the very essence of nations. As Imlala prepared to lead his men into a battle that felt ever more surreal, he whispered a silent prayer for humanity. Roosevelt, rallying his nation, understood that the battle ahead would not just be fought on the battlefield, but in the very hearts of the people. And Ben-Gurion, galvanizing his community, stood firm in the belief that the price of freedom was worth every sacrifice. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through history, and as the clouds of war gathered, the question remained: what would be the cost of unforgettable military strategies? Each character stood on the precipice of change, unaware that the storm was just beginning, and the true test of their resolve was yet to come. The path ahead was uncertain, but one truth loomed large: the choices made would shape the very fabric of the world. The next chapter awaited, promising revelations that would shake the foundations of nations and challenge the fervent dreams of those who dared to defy fate. The maelstrom of war surged forward, unstoppable and fierce, as the German Wehrmacht pressed deeper into Polish territory. Lieutenant Hermann Himmler, now entrenched in a world defined by destruction, felt the weight of the unfolding catastrophe pressing down on his heart. Each passing day cemented the reality that the strategies deliberated in the shadows of Berlin were not merely abstract concepts, they were a brutal reality wreaking havoc on innocent lives. As dawn broke over the ruins of Warsaw, Imlala found himself stationed at a command post that overlooked the city. The sounds of artillery fire echoed in the distance, punctuating the grim silence that hung over the landscape. His fellow officers remained steadfast in their belief that every push forward was a step towards fulfilling a grand vision of German dominance. But for Imlala, the thrill of victory had become tainted by the specter of human suffering that lay at the center of their Blitzkrieg campaign. Lieutenant, Captain Weiss barked, snapping Imlala from his reverie. The enemy is retreating, but we must ensure they don't regroup. Weiss's eyes gleamed with the fervor of triumph, a stark contrast to the hollow pit growing in Imlala's stomach. He nodded, masking his inner turmoil, and stepped outside the makeshift command center. The streets of Warsaw were strewn with debris, the remnants of what had once been vibrant neighborhoods. Smoke curled into the morning sky, mingling with the cries of the wounded. Imlala pushed forward, his heart heavy with a mix of resolve and dread. As he moved through the ruins, he came across a group of Polish civilians huddled together, their eyes filled with fear and confusion. "Please help us," a woman begged, cradling a child in her arms. Imlala's instincts screamed at him to offer comfort, to bridge the gap between soldier and civilian. Yet, he felt the chains of duty binding him. He could see the hardened gaze of his superiors behind him, ready to chastise any act of compassion that did not align with their orders. "We will get you to safety," he managed to stammer, torn between the orders of his country and the pain etched on the faces around him. But as he turned to clarify his intent, he was met by the sharp voice of Captain Weiss. "Get them to the side. We have no time for this." Weiss barked, adding to Imlala's turmoil. As he led the civilians away, he realized the price of operational efficiency was the loss of his humanity. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, President Franklin D. Roosevelt prepared to take the next step in America's participation in the conflict. His recent address to the nation had struck a chord, and he sensed a growing resolve among the American public. The memory of the last war weighed heavily on their hearts, but this time, Roosevelt promised, they would not stand idle. "General Marshall, we need to take a strong stance," Roosevelt declared, pacing the Oval Office as he contemplated the strategies to bolster American involvement. "The world is watching, and if we don't take action now, we might lose more than just Europe. We could lose our very identity as a nation of freedom." Marshall nodded, the seriousness of the situation reflected in his expression. "President, we need to ramp up our support for the Allies. It is time to send military aid directly to Britain. They're our bulwark. We must also prepare our own forces. The longer we wait, the stronger the Axis powers grow. Then let us do it. We'll establish a Lend-Lease program, giving Britain the tools they need to resist. And we'll begin military training for our soldiers. America will stand united against tyranny." Back in Palestine, David Ben-Gurion was galvanizing the Jewish community, aware that the storm of war in Europe had profound implications for their future. At a gathering in Tel Aviv, he addressed a crowd buzzing with urgency. "Friends, we face an existential threat not only from Europe as tyrants, but from the chaos that engulfs our homeland." Ben-Gurion spoke, his voice firm and unwavering. "We must prepare ourselves for defense, for the fight for our future may soon be upon us. Unity is our strength, and we must organize our community." As the meeting progressed, plans emerged for training camps, arms procurement, and a concerted effort to establish a Jewish defense force. Ben-Gurion understood that the strength of their resolve would not only protect their aspirations for homeland but also affirm their identity in the face of external threats. As war continued its relentless march, the front lines in Poland revealed the true cost of Blitzkrieg. The German forces had pushed deep into Polish territory, capturing cities and inflicting heavy losses. Yet with each victory, Himmler's heart sank further. Reports of resistance movements began to filter in, and the sound of gunfire grew more chaotic. The Polish people, despite their overwhelming odds, were fighting back with courage and tenacity. Himmler stood at a crossroads, torn between duty to his country and the reality of the humanitarian crisis unfolding before him. "Lieutenant, we need to prepare for another push," Weiss ordered, eyes focused on the advancing troops. Himmler's mind raced, grappling with the moral implications of their actions. "Yes, sir," he replied, but the words felt heavy on his tongue. In the weeks that followed, the situation in Europe escalated. Germany's advances continued, but so did the resolve of the Allied nations. Roosevelt's call for unity had resonated deeply, and as military aid flowed to Britain, the tide of public sentiment began to shift. The idea of isolationism waned, replaced by a determination to confront the forces threatening the very fabric of democracy. Himmler, meanwhile, found himself increasingly isolated within his own unit. The moral dilemmas he faced weighed heavily, and he began to confide in a close comrade, Sergeant Reinhardt. "Reinhardt, what have we become?" Himmler questioned one night as they prepared for another day of combat. "We are not just soldiers, we are agents of destruction. Every order we follow feels like another step away from humanity." Reinhardt, a pragmatic soldier, looked at him with a mix of understanding and concern. "We do what is necessary for our country, Himmler. We fight for our people, for our future. That is what we were trained to do. But at what cost?" Himmler pressed, desperation creeping into his voice. "Are we willing to sacrifice our souls for a victory that feels increasingly hollow?" While the ground shook with the ferocity of war, Roosevelt continued to rally the American people. The momentum for involvement grew stronger, and the Allies began to bolster their defenses. Franklin knew that America's entry into the war was inevitable, an awakening that would change the dynamics of the battlefield entirely. As the key battles in Europe reached a critical juncture, Himmler found himself in a skirmish outside a Polish village. The air was thick with gunpowder and smoke, the cries of men echoing against the backdrop of chaos. Amid the chaos, Himmler spotted a Polish soldier again, this time fighting fiercely to defend his homeland. Their eyes met, and in that instant, all the noise of war fell silent. "Himmler," Weiss shouted, pulling him back to reality. "Focus. We have a job to do." With a jolt, Himmler turned back to the fray, his conscience screaming as the fighting intensified. As the dust settled, the village lay devastated, a testament to the ravages of war. Himmler's heart sank as he realized that the very strategies they had championed were now leaving scars that would last long beyond the final battle. Yet, amid the despair, a flicker of hope ignited within him. He began to understand that the true fight was not only against the enemy, but also within himself. His resolve to stand for compassion gained strength, even as the war continued to rage on, threatening to consume all in its path. As the months rolled on, the tides shifted. The Allies began to mount a more coordinated effort, bolstered by American support. The resolve of the British, buoyed by Roosevelt's words, began to turn the tide of the war. The long-awaited moment of confrontation was approaching, a clash that would determine the fate of not just Europe, but the world itself. In one final meeting in Berlin, as plans shifted for a broader campaign, Himmler knew that he had to make a choice. He decided to confide in an influential officer, a man with power to influence decisions. "Sir, we must consider the human cost of our strategies," he implored, feeling the weight of urgency. "If we persist down this path, we risk creating a legacy built on destruction rather than a future for our people." The officer looked at him, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You speak boldly, Himmler. But remember, we believe in our cause. Victory is paramount." "The true victory honors humanity," Himmler replied, feeling a surge of determination. And for the first time, he felt a shift in the room, a crack in the hardened resolve that had defined their discussions. It was a small victory, but for Himmler, it was a step towards reclaiming the humanity lost in the chaos of war. Meanwhile, Ben-Gurion's efforts in Palestine bore fruit as international attention turned to the plight of Jewish communities amid the war. With the chaos in Europe fueling their resolve, they found allies willing to